Hello and welcome to this spotlight on CPA Jay's expert advisors. Today, we are thrilled to put the spotlight on Jamie Andree. CPA Jay strives to develop and promote transformative advocacy that removes systemic barriers, enhances organizational responses, and improves professional practices to meet the self-defined needs of domestic and sexual violence survivors. This work really centers on the intersection of poverty and domestic violence. And so to do this work, multiple partnerships with expertise in diverse issue areas are needed to enhance economic security for survivors. As such, CPA Jay is thrilled and honored to have such a coalition at our back. They really inform and guide our work. So today we welcome and are honored by Jamie, who is going to share a little bit about who she is, her work in partnership with CPA Jay, as well as offer some reflections on our efforts to address the intersection of poverty and domestic violence as a collective. So Jamie, thank you for joining us, and take it away.
Thank you. Well, I'm a lawyer and I'm director of the Low Income Taxpayer Clinic at Indiana Legal Services. Our clinic helps low-income people solve their tax problems. We also offer tax education and information, particularly to survivors and also to taxpayers whose first language is not English. Now, I've had my current job for the last 10 years, but I've actually worked as a lawyer with Indiana Legal Services since 1979. Before tax, I handled all kinds of cases, primarily public benefits, family law, housing, and collection defense. I would say in the last 37 years, I've probably represented thousands of low-income clients, many of whom are abuse survivors. I believe that helping survivors address their economic issues is anti-violence work. Financial instability undermines safety, and tax is one of these things that's a two-edged sword. On one hand, tax debt traps survivors and undermines their economic stability. But tax can also provide significant financial benefits that can help survivors achieve economic stability. Whether it's to get rid of tax debt or to secure tax benefits, I believe that survivors need representation. Now, some of my work with survivors has involved solving tax problems, but a lot of it has involved tax-related education. I believe survivors need to know the rules and their rights, and that help is available when they need it. Now, I also train and advise attorneys who represent survivors, particularly in divorce matters where a lot of these tax issues come up. So I've handled a lot of innocent spouse cases for survivors. These are cases where a survivor owes tax from a joint tax return that was filed with the spouse. In these cases, we ask IRS to relieve the survivor from responsibility for the joint tax debt. So success in this area allows the survivor to receive refunds that would otherwise be taken to collect the joint tax debt, and also allows the survivor to avoid other kinds of intrusive collection activities by IRS. And I feel like they're all important and meaningful cases, but I wanted to mention one in particular because it points out the impact on individuals of systemic advocacy. So several years ago, I worked with some other tax attorneys to provide comments to IRS, which was planning to change the form that was used to request innocent spouse relief. And one of the things that we were able to convince IRS to do was to greatly expand its definition of abuse beyond physical violence. Up until that point, IRS had only asked about physical abuse on the innocent spouse form, on the old form. But IRS was willing to take a number of our comments and accept them, and the new form contained many examples of abuse that IRS would consider well beyond simply physical violence. So shortly after the new form came out, I met with a survivor who had asked for innocent spouse relief on her own a few years earlier and had been turned down. And she came to our clinic to see if we could solve her tax problem. Now, when I reviewed her submission, which was on that old IRS form, we noticed that she had checked no in answer to the question about whether she had been abused. And she explained that the reason she said no was that the question had just asked about physical abuse, which she had not experienced, but she had been subjected to very severe emotional and psychological abuse. And when she saw the new form, she said to me, well, I certainly would have checked yes if the old form had asked the questions these ways. And so because we had convinced IRS to change its form for everyone, we were able to show that this client was a survivor, and we were able to convince IRS to grant her relief from the joint tax liability. Needless to say, I really felt very gratified that because I had in my office someone who had actually benefited from the systemic advocacy work that I had done. Now, my connection with CSA Jay started actually after I sent in a proposal for a partnership pilot project. I was very concerned that in the tax clinic we were not seeing very many survivors coming to us for help with tax problems. And so I submitted this proposal, and our clinic became a pilot project, and then we became a demo site. And then at some point, CSA Jay needed a tax expert, and I became that tax expert advisor. So that's how we got together. I really feel like we've done a lot together. Webinars educating advocates about tax issues that impact survivors, comments to the Department of Education opposing a provision in the new student loan repayment calculations that would have adversely affected survivors while they were still married to their abuser. But the biggest thing for me has been writing the chapter on tax advocacy for survivors for the upcoming guidebook. It was really amazing for me to have the opportunity to put all that information together in one place in a coherent form that would be useful to survivors and their advocates. So I'm very excited to see the guidebook when it comes out. I'm going to read all of the chapters. It was a lot of work to write my chapter, but I really felt like it was a great opportunity. I feel like working with CSA Jay has had a really major influence on me, particularly when it comes to survivor-centered advocacy. I think lawyers, and as I said earlier, I'm a lawyer, we sometimes view clients' problems through a very narrow lens and just focus on immediate resolution of a very specific problem. But tax issues are just part of the whole continuum of challenges that are faced by survivors. It's important to me to make sure that all survivors know about tax issues and that we are here to help them when they are ready to address those problems in the way that they are ready to address them. I've also learned quite a bit about building partnerships, the prep work, the little tiny baby steps, and how, kind of to market ourselves and what we do to prospective partners. So I want to talk a little bit about economic justice. It means many things, but to me, it's about ensuring that everyone has control over their own financial situation and has access to consumer law remedies and is protected from fraud and from other abusive practices. I think that working for economic justice also means working to ensure that everyone has access to information about their economic and consumer rights and has a means to ensure those rights are enforced. I think it's really indisputable that economic justice is critical to economic stability. Economic instability puts survivors in inherently unsafe position. Economic dependence can make it much harder for survivors to permanently end the connection with their abuser. Economic instability also increases the likelihood of encountering institutional injustices, things like predatory lending practices, and things like that. So I'm excited about some things for the future. I think that there are other systemic tax issues out there that need to be identified and addressed. And I'm hoping to be able to continue the work that I've been doing with CPA Jay.
Wow, Jamie, you're amazing. We have done a lot.
We have done a lot of stuff.
Just to wrap this up, I do want to say quickly before we end this spotlight that how much we at CPA Jay appreciate how clearly you explain the connections across consumer and domestic violence advocacy kind of arenas, as well as how you mentioned with your advocacy with the IRS, how important it is to link our individual work to seeing and making changes and seeing the possibilities for systems change. We know and hear from advocates and survivors across the country how much innovative and creative work they're doing on an individual level, and I think that there's an important role for us to play in changing the terrain and the landscape that they're having to navigate. And so just to end, one thing that Jamie mentioned briefly is that in addition to being an amazing CPA Jay expert advisor, she also leads one of CPA Jay's demonstration sites. So she is very busy. And that work is featured in a pilot report that you can find on our resource library at www.csaj.org. The Indiana, Jamie also mentioned that they've recently modified and updated the Indiana Legal Services website to reflect some of the guidebook work that she's done, which is not only beautiful but meaningful and for a lot of different groups. So please check them out. And then in some of the, finally, just to briefly mention, with the demonstration site work, we'll also be releasing soon a needs assessment toolkit that Jamie, along with 3 other demonstration sites, have done some incredible work to really map what the economic landscape is for survivors in their communities and in their context, and kind of look at multi-levels for change. And so all of that and much more, including webinars and resources and advocacy briefs and all sorts of tools that Jamie has contributed to our work, can be found at our website. And again, you can go to Indiana Legal Services as well. So thank you, Jamie, for you and for all that you do, and for being with us today.
Well, thank you for having me, involving me in this wonderful project.